What's up guys, and welcome back to another one of my videos on the playthrough. Right now we are playing through the entire Resident Evil series, and I have just beat Resident Evil 3, the remake. So this will mark the 4th game in the chronological series of the Resident Evil games that I've been playing. And I really enjoyed this one. I know there was a lot of mixed reception when the game initially came out. I do remember when the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis came out in '99. I did not play it though. Somehow I never got around to playing it, but I did have friends that played it and I did watch other people play it, and I know the whole premise of the game. You know, the Nemesis is chasing you the whole time, and I've always liked the Nemesis as a character. He's always been my favorite tyrant. So I was excited to finally jump in with the remake when Resident Evil 3 Remake came out, and I've heard all of the complaints about how short it is and everything like that. So I kind of knew what I was getting myself into when I was going into it. But anyway, before I get started, it would mean a great deal to me if you head over to my channel, hit subscribe, click that bell to get notifications every time I post a new video, and you can watch me in my endeavors as I play through different video game franchises, and you can also follow me on Twitch and watch me as I play them in real time too. Overall, I had a very good experience with this game. Now, the original Resident Evil 3 was released on September 22nd, 1999. It was directed by, and I know I'm probably going to butcher some of these names, but I'm really trying my best here. It was directed by Kazuhiro Aoyama, written by Yasuhisa Kawamawa. The remake, which was what I played on PlayStation 4, was released on April 3rd, 2020. It had 4 directors, which were Kahiko Sakata, Yasuhiro Sito, Yasuhiro Enpo, and Yukio Endo. I hope I'm close on some of those, but I have no idea. So as always, before I get into the story, the gameplay, everything like that, let's go over a quick plot synopsis of where we're at in the series. The game is set in Raccoon City during a zombie apocalypse caused by an outbreak of the T-virus that was created by pharmaceutical company Umbrella Corporation. On September 28, 1998, former Special Tactics and Rescue Service, STARS, member Jill Valentine is attacked in her apartment by an Umbrella-created intelligent bioweapon known as Nemesis, who attempts to kill her and all remaining members of STARS. Upon escaping her building, she meets up with fellow STARS officer Brad Vickers, but Brad is bitten by a zombie and tells Jill to save herself. After another encounter with Nemesis, she is saved by Carlos Oliveira. Carlos and his group of surviving UBCS mercenaries, Mikhail Victor, Tyrell Patrick, and Nikolai Genoviev, have set up subway trains which they plan to use to evacuate civilians from the city. After surviving several encounters with Nemesis, Jill manages to reactivate power to the subway while Carlos and Tyrell remain in the city to search for Dr. Nathaniel Bard, an Umbrella scientist who might know how to make a vaccine for the T-virus and save the city. As Jill, Nikolai, and Mikhail depart in the train, Mikhail expresses his suspicions toward Nikolai on how their platoon was ambushed by zombies. Nemesis suddenly attacks the train and kills the civilians. Nikolai locks the other two out, forcing them to defend themselves. Nemesis grabs Mikhail, who sacrifices himself by detonating an explosive, causing the train to derail. Jill escapes as seemingly the only survivor of the crash. Carlos and Tyrell travel to the city's police department where they plan to find Bard in the STARS office. The two witness RPD Lieutenant Marvin Branagh being bitten by a zombified Brad, who is killed by Carlos shortly after. The two enter the STARS office and communicate via video with Bard, who informs them that he is at the hospital. Meanwhile, as Tyrell traces Brad's location, Jill escapes the wreckage of the derailed train, only to be again pursued by Nemesis, who is now heavily mutated. Jill radios Carlos and engages the monster, managing to escape it, but only after it infects her with the T-virus. Jill falls unconscious, and Carlos finds her roughly a half day later, taking her to Spencer Memorial Hospital, the location of Bard. Carlos fights his way through the infested hospital, only to find Bard has been murdered. He views a video from Bard confessing that the T-virus was engineered by Umbrella, and despite Umbrella hiring him to develop the vaccine, Umbrella's board now wants to destroy it and eliminate all traces of the virus's existence. Tyrell arrives at the hospital, and they discover that the US government plans to destroy Raccoon City in a missile strike to eradicate the T-virus infestation. Carlos travels to the Nest 2 lab underneath the hospital to find more vaccines, while Tyrell tries to contact whoever he can to try and stop the missile strike. Jill awakens on the day of the missile strike, October 1st, and pursues Carlos to Nest 2. She encounters Nikolai, who is revealed to be a supervisor hired by an unknown contractor to sabotage Umbrella's efforts to hide their involvement and to observe and collect data from attacks of several bioweapons, including Nemesis. Nemesis kills Tyrell and continues to pursue Jill throughout the lab. Jill manages to synthesize a vaccine, but an encounter with Nemesis prompts Nikolai to retrieve it for himself as he leaves her to fight the monster. Jill attempts to destroy Nemesis in a vat of solution designed to dispose of any biological waste, only for the NE-alpha parasite and T-virus strain in Nemesis to prompt further mutation, resulting in a giant mass of flesh with tentacles, which is what happens in like every Resident Evil game. Jill then uses a prototype railgun to finally eliminate Nemesis for good. At the hospital's helipad, Nikolai disarms Jill and destroys the vaccine, acknowledging that he doesn't care for the city's fate as long as he gets paid for sabotaging Umbrella. Carlos intervenes and restrains Nikolai for Jill to shoot. When interrogated on who he works for, he offers to reveal the information and pay any price in exchange for his life. Disgusted by his greed, Jill retrieves the destroyed vaccine case and escapes the city with Carlos via helicopter, leaving Nikolai behind. The city is destroyed by the missile strike and Jill vows to take down Umbrella. So there you have it, the whole plot synopsis for Resident Evil 3. The game was very short. I understand why people complained about this and why it kind of took down some reviews because of how short it was, because initially it's a $60 game that people are paying for. I paid $40 for it because I bought it a few months after it came out. I think that's a fair price, considering I feel like Capcom kind of wants you to play through the game more than once, because once you beat the game, you get unlockables. So how was the overall story? As someone who didn't play the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis and played this, I thought the story was actually very well done. The voice acting in this game is way better than voice acting in any other Resident Evil game that I've played thus far. From Zero, the remake of 1, remake of 2, and now this, hands down the best acting that I've seen in the series so far. Character development is great. There's nothing really like too corny or too cheesy that I've seen in like the past games that I've played. It does help that, you know, it's more recent. And the game was extremely cinematic too. I know that the whole game you have the Nemesis basically chasing you, but the cutscenes that kind of flowed into the gameplay, I just love that element of games, and it felt like it was doing it a lot more than 2 had done. So I enjoyed that aspect of it too. And I also just enjoyed that it was just action-packed from start to finish. You're in your apartment and the Nemesis just bursts through the door and it's like, okay, we're getting started with this right now. So I really enjoyed that aspect. And yeah, the game may be short, but that's not always a bad thing, right? I came off of playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey before I played this. I spent probably like 3 full days playing that game and its DLC. And I love the long games too. Yeah, I got my money's worth because I played it for a full, like, in game time, 3 days. There is a point in long games where I'm just like, okay, let's just wrap this up. Let's get this over with. So it was kind of nice going from such a long game to such a short game and just being like, all right, I'm done with this within like a couple days, you know, of playing. I think I had 7.5 hours of total game time. The average game time is somewhere between 6 and 8 hours. So it's just short and sweet. I don't mind that the game is short as long as I'm getting enjoyment out of it. Also, I think that I could be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure that they added the Carlos part of the game where you go to the police station. But I also kind of enjoyed how they connected that to Resident Evil 2, because that took place before Leon and Claire were there, and you get to see how like the wall was blown out, and you get to see the officer that was bitten. Really good kind of like world building and connecting with that I loved seeing. And I kind of liked roaming the halls of the police station, you know, one more time too. So the gameplay. I mean, it's basically Resident Evil 2. I'm pretty sure they just kind of took the same engine and just made it Resident Evil 3. And that's why it didn't take them very long to push this out, a year after they had already done Resident Evil 2 Remake. So overall, the third-person view, I love that way better than the fixed camera. It was just kind of like almost a DLC to Resident Evil 2, and it was good. At times, the controls felt a bit clunky, and the animations felt a bit too long, and that frustrated me. There's a lot more boss battles in this than there was in Resident Evil 2. You know, you're fighting the Nemesis like 3 times, and there's a lot of dodging that needs to be done. Dodging out of the way is something you don't use as much in Resident Evil 2 as you do in 3, at least the way that I played it. Sometimes the dodging animation runs a little bit long, and even though I'm trying to get away from a zombie, he winds up getting me anyway. Or I'm trying to get away from the Nemesis, and he winds up, you know, hitting me and I lose a bunch of health. I found that this was a recurring problem throughout the game, which did result in me dying a few times, resulted in me getting a little frustrated, or I would dodge and I'd actually dodge into the Nemesis's attacks as opposed to dodging away from them. So it was a little clunky there, and I was getting a little angry, but overall it didn't really ruin my experience with the game. And one thing I wanted to bring up is the scare factor, right? So in all these Resident Evil games, they're more horror games, but I felt like this was more of like a thriller on your edge of the seat. There were a couple scary moments in the game, but as a whole, I feel like this was probably the least horror, least scariest game of the 4 that I've played so far. The 2 points of the game that really stick out to me in my head is when you're trying to turn on the power at the power plant, and the Draindemoses, I believe that's how you call those monsters, will infect you with the parasite. That was kind of scary because you don't really see them coming, they just kind of come out of nowhere. And then the other part was in the hospital with the hunters, especially because they are tanks and they are hard to take down unless you have like a grenade or a grenade launcher, and you can hear them, so that adds to the whole scare factor. Those 2 parts were the only 2 that I found myself like kind of scared of the game. The rest was more of just like a run away from the nemesis. But again, I love that whole dynamic too. And some of the complaints that I've been seeing online was that it was rushed, which I understand that. It does seem rushed at times. There's not as many puzzles as you get in the other Resident Evil games. It's more of an action game than anything. It's way more action-based than like survival horror, which is what we got for the other games. You know, putting together a puzzle to move on to the next level, move on to the next room, something like that. But for me, the length of the game aside, it's kind of refreshing because it makes the game stick out a little bit more as something different. And it makes it stick out as like the action game. And I know they tried that with Resident Evil 6, which I also still haven't played yet, and it got met with like poor reception. But at least they're trying to kind of differentiate from different games. And that's how I took it. Again, this game, a lot of fun. Highly recommend if you're a Resident Evil fan, or if you're just a fan of games in general and you're looking for something like really short to just kind of play in between your games or something like that, something you can play within a week casually. I think that Resident Evil 3 was a great remake and great addition to the story. So I guess it's time to rank it. So as of right now in the Resident Evil chronological. So as of right now in the Resident Evil timeline, I've played Resident Evil 0, Resident Evil 1 Remake, and Resident Evil 2 Remake. And right now my ranking of them is Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 1 Remake, and then Resident Evil 0. So where am I gonna put Resident Evil 3? There was some thinking that went into this process, and overall I'm basing this on my overall enjoyment with the games. I know a lot of people are gonna be disappointed with this, but I'm gonna put it right below Resident Evil 2 Remake. So my new rankings: Resident Evil 2 Remake, Resident Evil 3 Remake, Resident Evil 1 Remake, Resident Evil 0. So that's my new rankings of the Resident Evil series. Now I know at the beginning I said I wasn't gonna play Code Veronica, but after doing more research, after looking into it more, I think that I'm going to add Code Veronica and the Revelations games. I know that Code Veronica kind of ties up the Umbrella storyline, so I feel like I need to play it before I move on to Resident Evil 4 and the story completely changes. I've never played it, so just like Resident Evil 3, I've never played it. I don't know if it's going to be rough because it's a little dated. There's no remake for it, so I'm going to go back and I've downloaded Code Veronica X on my PlayStation 4, and that's what I'm going to play, and that's what my next video is going to be on. So make sure you check in for that and see where that stacks up against all the other Resident Evil games that I've been playing. The Resident Evil franchise playthrough moves on with Code Veronica next time, and I hope to see you guys then. Until then, it would mean a great deal to me if you could give me a big thumbs up on this video, and if you head on over to my channel and subscribe, I would really appreciate that. So let me know what you thought about Resident Evil 3 Remake in the comments below, and hopefully I will see you on my next video.